Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday, and welcome to this month's edition of WZ's Instructor Insights. My name's Chris, and I'm going to spend a couple minutes with you here on the first Friday of July, right? Hopefully, you guys have some nice weather where you are. I know that it is crazy hot here where I am. Welcome to summer, eh? Again, I hope you guys are having a good summer. Vacation, time away, time with your family, enjoying holiday time, anything like that. Always great to be with you guys. This is here in the middle of the year. We started the Instructor Insights in January. So this is, I guess, episode number 7 for our Instructor Insights, and it's a pleasure of mine to be with you guys here. In the morning, I see some people jumping in and saying hi. So I'm glad you guys are all here and able to scratch out a couple minutes out of your morning to spend with me, as we're going to talk about the cognitive interview here this morning for a couple minutes. It would be impossible for me to teach you guys the cognitive interview in the very short period of time that they provide for me, even though I'm going to go well beyond that allotted time, right? But it would be impossible for me to teach you guys the cognitive interview, but it is something that I think you guys should be familiar with. And the way that I'm going to do this today is talk about the top 6. Why did I come up with 6? I have no idea. But the top 6 tips and takeaways that I want you guys to have to help you understand a little bit about the cognitive interview and how it can be very beneficial to you in your investigative interview process, right? So the thing about the cognitive interview, before I give you your 6 tips here, let me give you a quick little background to the cognitive interview. The idea behind the cognitive interview, which is brilliant and ideally suited for victims or complainant, on cases, eyewitness accounts to a crime, to an incident, that kind of thing. It's even good for conversations around the respondent to let's say a hostile work environment situation that you might be investigating. It's interesting. I had a call with a client earlier this week, and they were asking about how do we vet out, and I think the wording that they had used was how do we vet out the credibility of the statements that we're getting for those people that are involved in a kind of a he said, she said. And so we talked about the benefits and the use of a cognitive interview. Why? Because a cognitive interview is essentially us taking a standard fact gathering interview to a completely different level and getting what we like to call, basically the pure truth, getting more information, more details, getting more accurate information from your subject. It is all designed, the cognitive interview itself is designed to maximize memory retrieval, but maximizing the memory retrieval around details, not just general statements. We tend to get when we stick to asking certain questions where we're getting basic information, we want details. And the idea behind it, the way it was constructed years ago, was to make the interview process much more compatible with how the brain processes information. And going through an encoding and a retrieval process, the brain is in the moment of, let's say, an incident, encoding information surrounding that incident. So when we put our subject in a position which is much more like the incident, when we ask questions, we're getting more accurate, more detailed information. So what we're trying to do is kind of recreate that reinstate the environment in which they processed within the interview room, because then that increases memory recall and provides much more information. So let me give you the top, again, 6 tips for your cognitive interview here. So the 6 tips on my notes that I have for you. Number 1, we're going to talk about the difference between a fact gathering interview, a basic standard fact gathering interview, and the cognitive interview. And I'll break that down for you quickly. Number 2, we will talk about the importance of having a good, robust introductory phase of the interview process. Number 3, we're going to talk about proper questioning and why having more open-ended questions benefits you during the interview process and used in the cognitive interview. Number 4, wait, do I have 4? 1, 2. Yeah, there it is. Okay, number 4, we're going to talk about how we fragment the untainted original story and statement and the importance of that, how we do it, and why we do it to kind of construct then all the details around the incident that's under investigation. Number 5, we're talking about the importance of perspective and the individual's perspective they're providing and why we want to change perspective during the interview and the cognitive interview process. And then finally, number 6, we'll talk about a couple little various retrieval techniques. So today's lesson, today's instructor insight, the takeaways that I'd love to have you walk away with from session. In fact, I'm going to throw it in the chat right now. You guys are going to have access to a kind of like a little cheat sheet, I guess, throw that in the chat section there. And again, guys, thanks for jumping in. Good morning to you guys. Always good to see familiar names popping in and hanging out with us on the first Friday of every month. But you guys have that little cheat sheet. So let's go through these top 6 here real quickly for you guys, right? So first off, when we talk about number 1, all right, takeaway number 1, tip number 1 for the cognitive interview. How is it different from a fact gathering interview? Well, the basics of a fact gathering interview, I think it's safe to say that there tend to be 4 very simple, very basic phases, right? We have an introduction phase, which includes, rapport building. We have let's get their version of events. Hey, man, tell me what happened. We get their version. Then we have, let's get all the details. Then what? We tend to cruise through the W's, the who, what, where, when, how, why, and answer, all the questions and get some details. And then we close out the conversation. That tends to be a very standard fact gathering type of interview, right? Well, what happens with the cognitive interview is there's essentially like a 5th piece to it. So we take the 4 basic elements of a fact gathering interview, and the cognitive has 5. We still have this introduction phase, but it's very, very robust. And we're going to talk about the importance and the value of that robust introduction phase, right? The second thing that happens is we do get their account. We're going to make sure we're doing it with an open-ended question. Tell me what happened. We get their account. We take that account, we begin to then fragment it. From there, we then fill in all the blanks, just like we would in a regular fact gathering interview, get the details and that kind of thing. But we're going to go through the process of many much more open-ended types of questions, getting more details. Now, here's where the cognitive interview becomes a bit unique. This is where we're starting to change perspective, and we review the findings by changing perspective, changing order, some of the things that I'm going to talk about here briefly with you guys. This makes it unique, this advanced type of questioning, getting our subject in a position that is provided during the introduction phase of expectations here, and getting them back into kind of, putting them in that position of when the incident happened. So we're getting more information, continuing to review, and then eventually we close out the conversation. So you can see 4 of the phases are quite similar, however, much more robust. We're asking questions a little different, and then we're, of course, going to change their perspective. So those are the basic differences between a standard fact gathering and a cognitive interview. And some of those changes are very important to us within the cognitive. Now, the second tip that we're going to have today is the importance of that robust introductory process that we go through at the beginning of the interview. Now, the reason that becomes so important to you, and let me pull something up here. I know, where did it go? There it is. All right. The reason that becomes so important to us here is it creates certain elements of expectations within the interview process, right? So the importance of this robust, what we're going to do is we're going to have a very important rapport building phase here. Now, rapport, we tend to go through with most interviews, and having it sit down, creating a connection, building trust with our subject, particularly if we have someone who might be a reluctant victim, uncooperative witness or something like this. We need to take time to create that trust between the two of us. So we make very concerted, very important efforts into creating that rapport. Now, the second part that goes into this robust introduction is providing very in-depth instructions and expectations during the interview. Because what happens is what we're going to do through the cognitive is we put our subject in a position of essentially what's known as 4 memory retrieval rules that we're going to provide them at the beginning of the conversation. Now, these memory retrieval rules are fairly simple, but they're important to create expectations within the interview process. Those four very basic, very simple rules are: number one, we are going to put them in and reinstate them into that position in the environment in which the event took place. So what we end up doing is we say things like, I want you to go back in time. I want you to be able to see what you were seeing at the time. I want you to hear what you were hearing, feel what you were feeling. I want you to notice what's around you, listen to the sounds around you, and things like this. And what we're doing is we're putting them back in time, recreating the moment to help enhance their memory. The second we're going to do is in-depth reporting. Now, in-depth reporting, provide me as much detail as possible. Something that might seem insignificant to you could be very important to us, could be very important to this investigation, right? So we're asking for detail, not general, oh, it was warm. Okay. Let's see, it was 116 degrees, which in fact it was 116 degrees, which for the rest of the world, that's 46 for you, Celsius on Monday this past week. So yes, it was quite hot here. But I want in-depth reporting. That becomes an important piece of this, right? We're also then the fourth little, or I'm sorry, the third, kind of rule that we're going to remind them of is that we're going to be exploring the event in several different orders. So there's times when I get the original, hey, tell me. They tell me from, point A to point Z, right? And they go all the way through it. Well, there's times when we are going to several orders. I may start off at L. I may start off at P. I may continue to go forward, but I'm starting at different points, or I may even go backwards. And then finally, we're going to be reporting it from different perspectives. Now, what we mean from the different perspective could include if there was someone on the corner, if there was someone on the other side of the door. So what we end up doing through all of this is we're creating expectations. Once again, very simply, I want you to go back in time, see what you saw, hear what you heard, feel what you felt, provide as much detail as possible. We're going to explore it in a number of different orders, which means I may ask you the same question more than once. It doesn't mean I want you to change your answer. It doesn't mean I don't believe you, anything like that. There's a reason I'm doing it. Oh, and by the way, we may change, be looking at it from different perspectives as well to make sure we get as much detail as possible. So I'm creating this groundwork in the important robust introductory phase. So remember, tip number 2, in that robust introductory phase, really concerted efforts at rapport, create that relationship, build that trust, and then we provide expectations within the interview process. Tip number 3, we're going to use proper questioning techniques. And what that means is we're going to do more open-ended questions. Now, why do we want more open-ended questions in this type of interview process? Well, it's to create interviewee participation. It's not so much I'm going to ask, they respond. It's I give them the opportunity to provide their version. Subject autonomy becomes important at this stage, but the more open-ended questions creates their participation. It allows their narrative to emerge. Now, I know you guys have done interviews where you're like, okay, I talked to 4 different people and I have 4 different versions of the same event. How is that possible? Well, it's because of perspective, which is one of the things we'll talk about here at the end, but we're going to get their version of events coming out. And through this process, by asking more open-ended questions, what it helps us do is it also helps us avoid those leading questions, too many closed-ended questions that actually might taint memory, might influence information that they think that you're looking for, that kind of thing. Let's allow them to provide that information. Tip number 4, we're going to fragment that uninterrupted, untainted version. So at the beginning of the interview process, I'm going to ask a simple open-ended question. So tell me what happened Saturday night. And as their story emerges, I listen, I take my notes, it emerges. I'm not going to interrupt it, but there's going to be a point where I'm going to fragment it. Now, when we talk about fragmenting, for those of you that know me, you kind of know that I kind of scribble on pieces of paper here real quick, just to give you a simple insight into how this might work. I ask an open-ended question. That's their version. And I could say, this is section A, this is section B, this is section C, D, E, F, and so on to that one event. Now, what that might mean sometimes, and again, we've already told them we're going to ask the same question more than once. I may say, tell me what happened. They give me their version. And I may say again, hey, just to make sure we didn't miss anything, let's just go through it one more time. Tell me again what happened Saturday night. This gives me the opportunity to make sure my notes are accurate and then actually put that, here's section A, here's section B, here's section C. Now I fragmented that story. What I can do is then I break it up into logical pieces, which allows me to explore segment by segment through their initial memory of the event. So we're going to fragment that story. Tip number 5, the importance of perspective, right? And what we're going to end up doing is changing perspective. And that will add detail. The idea behind that is getting a change of perspective. They see things from different angles. You see, when we ask people about tell me what happened, they tend to give us a point of view, right? This is what I saw. This is what I heard. Here's how I was feeling at that time. And they're giving us their point of view. So by changing perspective, I can get a third person perspective. I can change their emotional state to get a different perspective. Go back in that time. How were you feeling at that time? Well, I was angry. Okay, so tell me, tell me why you were feeling angry because of what he said. Okay, so and again, it just kind of expands off of it. But I'm changing their perspective in a couple different ways. It's all about trying to get from their POV, their point of view, and their original perspective, and even presenting this in a rational frame of mind. Right, someone who may be going through had suffered some element of trauma through this incident. Trauma-informed interviewing becomes really important as well, and understanding the elements of the cognitive interview within the trauma-informed type of interview, because they're explaining something to you in a rational frame of mind. Well, this didn't happen to them in a rational frame of mind. So we want to change their perspective, get them back to how they were feeling at that moment and some other things like this. But changing the visual, changing the audio, changing that kinesthetic, this is what I saw, this is what I heard, this is how I felt, to a third person, if there were a camera in the room, and et cetera, and so on, some things like this, right? Changing their emotional perspective. But again, tip number 5, the importance of changing perspective. One thing that I learned in perspective, give you guys a quick little example of this. Is there a WZ logo on this bottle? That I learned from a colleague of mine over in Ireland a couple of years ago. And of course, as you guys look at it, absolutely there's a WZ logo. I mean, it's scratched to hell, but it's there. But the idea is that logo is not there from where I'm sitting. Changing perspective is important. This is why we're all looking at the same bottle. Some of us can see the logo, some of us can't. That's why we get different versions of the same event. Perspective, right? The 6th and final tip I got for you guys is going through various retrieval techniques. Now, in addition to changing perspective, other techniques we're going to do is we're going to jump into the middle of the story. Like I said, if it's A to Z, let's start at L. Hey, so let's start at this point here. And, remind me, let's go from there. And again, tell me what happened going from then on, right? Because when they're starting here, that starting point creates this narrative. Well, let's start here. Let's see what changes happen. I may go, let's start at P. And by the way, remind me, what happened before that? And I get them to go backwards, right? So we're reversing order in events, changing the perspective that way, changing the timeline, not changing the timeline. That's the wrong wording. Getting them to start their story in different positions to help with that timeline. We're going to use diagrams. That also puts them in a position to see it third person. I was here, they were here, the car was here, and this is where it took place. And they're seeing it from a different perspective. So the use of diagrams, we continue to review with the order, with changing perspective, with using diagrams, other advanced questioning type of techniques. And that gives you guys a quick high-level overview of the cognitive interview, the importance of it, the value of it, why we do it. And again, perfect for victims, witnesses. It can also be used on respondents. And again, it goes back to the question that I had on a call earlier this week. How do we vet out the credibility of a statement when it could be something like a he said, she said, and the cognitive interview helps with that. So one last reminder here, guys, your top 6 tips and takeaways for a cognitive interview. Number 1, understand the difference between a fact gathering interview and the cognitive. Number 2, recognize the importance of the robust introduction phase with rapport and creating expectations and going through those 4 memory retrieval rules. Number 3, make sure you're asking better questions, more open-ended questions. Let the narrative emerge from them rather than you guiding them through this conversation and through the event. Number 4, fragment the untainted version. Have it in logical segments so that you can build off of it. Number 5, the importance of understanding perspective and changing their perspective, which helps add details. right? And then number 6, the various retrieval techniques that we can go through and other advanced questioning by changing order, allowing diagrams, some other things like this. The idea here, guys, I have many different versions of the same event. As I grow details, the lines begin to intersect. And now I can figure out exactly what did take place and have a better sense of what happened. And that, guys, is the cognitive interview. So I hope you have some good takeaways from the session. I'll drop it into the chat one more time here, where you guys can have access to a little cheat sheet. Thank you again for joining me. For those of you that are here live with me on a Friday morning, appreciate your time. And taking time out of your schedules to hang out with me, on the first Friday. You guys, next month, once again on the first Friday, we will have Instructor Insights. And thanks for the kind words coming in here, guys. And once again, good luck to you all. Please keep in touch. Have a wonderful summer. Stay cool. Stay out of the heat. Be good to one another. And once again, guys, thanks a lot. And we'll talk to you sometime soon. All right. Be good, guys. Cheers.